I see narratives and everything. So whenever I do literally anything in the mountains, I'm always thinking in terms, I almost see myself as a character, which is a weird way to look at yourself, because sometimes a day in the hills is just a day in the hills.
Hi and welcome to Passing Outdoors. Today I am talking to Alex Roddie. He is an editor, author and just all-round mountain lover, and I wanted to catch up with him. So Alex, welcome.
Thanks, Davey.
No. Glad to have you on. Probably just for context, we have been for a walk today, so there may be a bit of reference to stuff that we've already talked about, but I think it will be good to capture it here, if that's all right.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's been... I've known you for a while through different guises, and we've passed each other in outdoor events and things. So I really wanted to catch up with you and just talk about your path in the outdoors. So I suppose the sort of best place to start would be just a bit of an introduction to yourself and what you do and what you're doing at the moment, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm editor of Sidetracked magazine, which is a triannual adventure magazine in print and online, and I spend a lot of time editing features that people send in to us for publication. I also write for the Great Outdoors magazine, TGO. I review quite a lot of gear, and I write books as well. So I've written The Farthest Shore for Vertebrate Publishing, which is a book about Cape Wrath Trail in winter, and I've written a couple of coffee table books for Gestalten about, they're called the Wanderlust books, so it's long distance hiking and that kind of thing. So yeah, kind of bit of outdoor writing here and there, bit of outdoor editing, and I love backpacking, mountaineering, running, all the good stuff.
I think that came out today was and it comes out across your books, etc. Is that long distance hiking is something that you're pretty passionate about?
Yeah, definitely.
So I think we'll get to that. I think I suppose to start with is where did your outdoor journey start? Like, was it family, or was it very young, or did you grow into it? What was the...
Yeah, it was kind of a rambling route, really. So I definitely grew into it. So my dad, he was a keen hill walker when he was young. I grew up listening to tales of him rambling over the Yorkshire Dales. The way he described it, he would go kind of looking for fossils and minerals and things. That was his passion. And when I was a kid, I was also obsessed with fossils and minerals. And I think it kind of started from there, really, in a strange sort of way, because rocks are to be found in mountains. And we went on family holidays to the Yorkshire Dales when I was a kid, me and my brother James, and my dad would take us walking. And one of the first hills I remember doing was Pike Door Hill above Malham. Most people have never heard of it. It's a little kind of nondescript bump on the skyline, but it's just kind of notable enough that you can think, I'm going to go and climb that. But I was also a really overweight child, and I found hiking uphill really hard work, and it was one of those things that I didn't really enjoy it, but I wanted to enjoy it, if that makes sense. So hill walking wasn't something that I kind of got into until later, a bit later in life, but I was a scout, a cub and a scout, so I got into, the kind of general bushcraft and mucking around in the woods and just general kind of low-level hiking really early. And then, so from being a scout, as a teenager, I discovered the pictorial guides by Wainwright, the Lake District, and became obsessed with the Lake District. And I wanted to do a gap year, just kind of like hiking. That was my plan for a gap year. And in the end, it ended up being just a couple of trips to the Lake District and a bit of kind of working in the local garden centre, But I did a trip to the Lake District. I think it was about 20-25 days, just me in a backpacking tent, kind of going from campsite to campsite. Not really much wild camping, but kind of basing myself in Langdale for a while and doing a few peaks, and then going across to Wasdale. And that was a really formative experience, and that was really where my passion for hill walking began.
And that was the first time you did any kind of multi-day.
Yeah, I think, let me think, was it the first one? No, my brother and I had previously done a short backpacking trip to mid Wales the year before, but it wasn't really hill walking. It was kind of just kind of tramping from campsite to campsite over the valleys. So I guess that was really our first one. But yeah, my trip to the Lake District, I consider that my first proper multi-day hill walking.
Set it in your mind that that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
I suppose we should probably mention your brother, because he is a very keen outdoors person as well, mountain lover. So I think there's definitely scope to get your brother on here at some point.
Oh, definitely. I think he'd love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll visit that another day. But did he become a kind of partner in the outdoors with you?
Yeah, very very much so. Right from the start, we'd often go hill walking together. A lot of our first trips were ones that, particularly first trips to North Wales when we started getting into scrambling, it wasn't something I would have considered myself capable of doing solo. And the fact that we were both kind of teenagers at the time, the only reason that our parents thought, we'll let them go and do this is because they were doing it together, kind of thing. When eventually I moved to Glencoe for a few years to work as a barman at the Clackaig Inn, James, I think a year after I started there, he came over and started working there as well. So we've spent a lot of time on the hill together over the years. Yeah.
So between going to university and, or I suppose at university, what was your outdoor involvement then? What did you do at university?
So at I went to UEA in Norwich and I studied computer science. So these are two factors that are as non-outdoorsy as you can imagine. So computer science, doesn't really evoke images of being outside, and also Norwich is, I think, probably as far away from mountains as you can get in the UK. But it did have an active felon mountaineering club, surprisingly active. So I signed up from Freshers Week, and we went on regular trips to Peak District, Lake District, North Wales, and then one trip a year to Scotland, or maybe two if we got like a winter trip in, which would be like a kind of 13-hour drive up to get there, But yeah, I had some key experiences actually as a student in the Fell Club.
What would stand out as a key experience?
My very first winter trip, which was 2006, went on a winter skills course in Cairngorms, and that was entirely a Fell Club thing. Just a couple of days tuition, ice axe, crampons, self-arrest, or kind of probably the most useful weekend I've ever spent in terms of skills picked up.
Yeah, I think the winter skills is probably a bit underestimated and overlooked, and especially for maybe experienced people on the hills. I think, and we talked about this earlier, that having that refresher can be very valuable, because you don't tend to do it a lot. But you want to be able to know how to do it when it is required. And did that sort of lead on to more sort of winter mountaineering? Or the
it led directly on to more winter mountaineering. So in much the same way as I'd become obsessed with the Lake District a number of years before, the winter skills course in Avonmore made me get obsessed by winter climbing. So I bought all the climbing guidebooks. I was like, right, I'm gonna become a winter climber. And kind of early experiences include a trip with James where we climbed the Runnel in, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Coriandrechtner. I can't pronounce it, I apologise. But the Runnel, which is a grade 2 winter gully, which was not in condition when we climbed it, and we had this mini epic. I remember James kind of standing there belaying beneath the crux for about 2 hours while I struggled to get over this out of condition chockstone or whatever. But I loved it. I was happy as Larry, and we did a number of trips up to Scotland in the years after that. Kind of we did kind of gradually pushing up to kind of grade 3 and 4. Castle Ridge on Ben Nevis was an early one that we both did, which was fantastic. I want to say that's grade 3, and that was our hardest route at the time, and the first kind of big mountain route that we'd done. Just amazing. Still remember it to this day.
And is this now, have you now gone through university and you're
so that was, let me get this right, that was March 2008, so that was my final year at uni, so I was still at university at that time.
Right. And were you still, was it with your brother a lot?
Mostly mostly going on trips with him and Fell Club, and then it was really 2008 that I started to go on big solo trips. So in fact, it was the tail end of a Fell Club trip that summer. So it was the summer of graduation. I was kind of at a bit of a loose end. I didn't really know what I was going to do after graduation. I'd figured out that I did not have a future as a programmer. I realised I did not have it what it took, and I wasn't going to enjoy it. So I was like, I kind of want to do something in the outdoors, but I don't really know what. So we had a big trip up to Glencoe with the Fell Club, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to stay in Glencoe after the trip, and I'm going to do a big backpacking route over all the Black Mountain Monroes and walk back originally the plan was to walk back to Glasgow, but because the weather turned, I got as far as Arrochar and gave up. But that was my first real kind of solo multi-summit trip in a reasonably lightweight style.
Right.
And that was another kind of turning point, I suppose.
And is that kind of lightweight and probably then, and if I remember rightly on Twitter, there was a very ultra lightweight world that developed on social media. Obviously out in the outdoors, but does that kind of link up, or is it something you came across yourself? How did you come across this ultralight type, a lightweight?
I think I really came across that whole world much later, actually. Right. So as early as that year 2008, I was kind of packing quite minimally to go into the hills, but I was oblivious to the whole ultralight scene. Really, it was more just a case of I want to go and do more stuff, and I need a lighter pack to do it. So I was really into my bivvy bagging at that point, which I've just kind of recently got back into again. But I mean, at that point, I was still wearing big boots, as we talked about earlier. I was wearing my Scarpa SLs and suffering through the blisters. So I was completely unaware of the fact that some people went into the hills in trail shoes or trainers or whatever. So it was only probably in 2015, 2016 that I came across what you might call the ultralight scene and started getting back into it, I suppose. Right. Yeah.
So it's a big kind of year difference there, I suppose.
Yeah.
So from there, so you've finished uni, and what, you've moved to Glencoe now, or are you, where are we in terms of timeline?
I moved to Glencoe. So the way this all happened is a lot happened that year, actually, 2008. So I graduated in the June or the July. I moved back to Suffolk with my parents. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. My brother and I decided to take a trip to the Alps, and we went to Zermatt, and we did a walk up to the Schönbiel hut, and there we met a British woman called Zoe, and we had a chat, and she said, you know what, if you don't know what to do for a while, you should apply for a job at the Clackaig Inn. They're offering, seasonal positions. They have live-in staff. Go and live there for a bit. And when I got home, I found out that a friend of mine from UEA Fell Club, she had also recently gone up and got a job there. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. And so I did. And I moved to Glencoe. And originally the plan was, maybe I'll be there till the following Easter. And I ended up staying there for 3 years.
Time just flew by.
Yeah, it really did, yeah. Live in Barstaff at the Clackaig.
Well, not a better place, really. It's a stalwart of the Scottish mountaineering community.
Yep, definitely.
So I assume it was a case of trying to get as many of the mountains round there in as possible.
Exactly, yeah. So at that time I was really focused on climbing, but I was also focused on hill walking as well. And I didn't have a car. I've never been able to drive, so it was routes that I could walk to from the Clackaig, walks that I could hitchhike to and get the bus to. I spent an awful lot of time up on Bidge and Nambian, and also west face the Anach Dhu, which was the cliff that I could see from my bedroom window every morning. So I opened my curtains and I'd be like, ooh, which of these routes have I not done yet? So I spent a lot of time scrambling, kind of discovering the weird little chossy routes that no one else likes to do. A lot of those kind of routes on the Anach Dhu. Climbing with the other people I knew at the pub as well.
Well, I was going to ask, is there a bit of a climbing culture, or
there was
there
at the time
climbing culture there?
Yeah, there were a few legendary characters who I climbed with. From what I gather now, it's not such a thing. But at the time, yeah, if you wanted to be a climber and you were kind of in your early 20s or whatever, that was the place to be. Yeah.
Again, it's definitely a place to be. So, and what made it last 3 years? I suppose. What do you think it was that kept you there, and then ultimately what made you finish there?
What made me finish there? Yeah, I mean, the thing that kept me there, it's a really difficult thing to kind of put into words. But when you're in that clack egg bubble, it is like almost like a separate universe where nothing outside even seems to exist. And sometimes that's literally true when we would get snowed in, and it would just be the live-in staff literally snowed into the pub. So it did become this kind of isolated pocket universe with its own kind of rules and a really kind of intense culture. And, you know, the kind of mountain friendships that formed there were really kind of intense as well, as mountain friendships often are. And, you know, it was the kind of the overall the passion and the romance of the mountains, you know, because at that time as well I was obsessed with the history of mountaineering, the golden age of alpinism. So my head was filled with all these stories of, you know, of epics from, you know, the 1960s of people forging new routes on mountains and things like that. And there were loads of other stories from you know, clack egg folklore as well. So for example, there was a particular route called the Pinnacle Face on the west face of the Alec Dhu, which is this, again, relatively nondescript V-diff in summer, I think grade 4 in winter, but it just had this reputation as a route that clack egg staff would go and have epics on, and everyone had a story, and then I went and had my own epic on it, you know.
So what was your epic?
So this was 2009, and I was climbing with a guy called Mike Martin at the time, who was a much better climber than me. Much better, but we got drunk and we hatched this plan. It's like, you know, we're going to go and climb the Pinnacle Face tomorrow. We're definitely going to go and do it. But we woke up horrendously hungover and left a bit late, and the route wasn't in nick. You know, it was just everything that could possibly go wrong. But we were so kind of stubborn. We were gonna do it, and we kept kind of kidding ourselves. Oh yeah, it's just about wintry enough. It'll be fine. We'll see what the next pitch is like. But it never got any better. And I think we were due to start a bar shift at, I want to say it was 5 o'clock, and 5 o'clock came and went, and we were still on the route, just struggling with this awful final pitch. And then we topped out, and we hadn't really thought through how we were going to get down. All the possible descents from the top of the Pinnacle Face were just avalanche death, because of just how the conditions were. So we made the decision of abseiling back down the route, which was just a disaster from the start to finish. Mike left both of his shiny new ropes on the route and a lot of his rack. I think those ropes were still there the next summer. It was just this succession of awful diagonal abseils in the dark. It's just an absolute nightmare. I ended up hitting myself in the face with the adze of my ice axe. I had this massive, great big cut. I was bleeding everywhere. Yeah, I still love telling the story.
I was going to say it's a suitable epic to add to the tales of
and there was all kinds of stories like that, you know, stories from the Clack Egg Gully, and you know, even things like, you know, seeing head torches of people stuck up on the Anakeegik at night and stuff like that. Obviously really bad for them, but it kind of fed into this legendary atmosphere of, you know, Glencoe is the place where proper adventures happen. So that I guess that's one of the big things that kept me there, and just the passion for exploring different routes up mountains, and, you know, a couple of really minor first ascents that I made in the area. And then the thing that led me to move away, as we were talking about earlier, is I did eventually start to become a bit jaded with being there. I think it was the fact that I didn't have a car meant that I was a little bit limited in where I could go. Obviously, you know, you'll get lifts to the hills with other people that you climb with, and so on, but there's only so many places you can easily get to by public transport or by walking. And obviously with a barman's rota, I wasn't having like 3 or 4 days off at a time, so I couldn't go and do multi-day trips in the far northwest or anything like that. I was basically limited to day walks. So I ended up kind of basically getting a little bit disgruntled, and if the weather on my days off wasn't perfect, I'd be like, oh, sod it, I'll stay at home, and I started to look forward to something else. And at the time, I met a young woman called Hannah who lives in Lincolnshire, and yeah, I decided to move down south to be with her. And I've been in Lincolnshire ever since.
The mountainous terrain of Lincolnshire.
The mountainous terrain of Lincolnshire, yes.
So in terms of, I mean, at this point, you've obviously decided not to be a programmer. Mm-hmm. You've done 3 years in the Cloughaig. Mm-hmm. What was your thoughts then on what you're going to do to kind of keep yourself in the mountains? Yes, keep myself in the mountains. So this was the start of a difficult period professionally. So I had been writing terrible fiction for years. Ever since I was about 14, I've been writing fantasy novels, sci-fi, that kind of stuff. At the time, I really wanted to be a novelist. I was working on a mountaineering novel called The Only Genuine Jones, about a climber called O.G. Jones, who was active in the 1890s. And I spent years working on this manuscript. I'd started it when I was at the Cloughaig, but it wasn't what you'd call a career plan. It was more kind of a vague set of wishes. But of course, I had to work in order to eat. So I got a job at Carphone Warehouse in Skegness, and that job is as bad as you can imagine. But it was a job when I needed a job. But yeah, it was. I like to think back on it as, in terms of the things that it taught me. It taught me a lot of patience. Yep. You got to take the positives from anything.
Well, this is it. It did teach me to be patient, and to be fair, I think it definitely improved my interpersonal skills, because you had to deal with a lot of very difficult people on a daily basis. But the thing is, it also made me very cynical about technology to an extent, big corporations, and things like that, because it was very much a case of all the mobile phone networks are crooks. That was the impression that I got, because whenever a customer came in with a problem, you would phone the network and you'd never get anyone helpful. But anyway, that's by the by. It was a difficult spell, professionally speaking.
So at this point, you're still writing.
Yes.
And what about getting outdoors? How's that going in Lincolnshire and Skegness? Yeah,
so it was late 2011, early 2012. I got that job. So the years 2012 to 2014 were definitely lean years in terms of mountains. I wasn't earning very much. I was writing. I was doing occasional trips to the hills, but we're talking about 2 or 3 a year at most. And my outdoor mojo was definitely at rock bottom, I would say. So I did a very good winter trip up to the Ben Alder area in 2012, which was fantastic. Then 2013, I think I basically just had one trip up to the Cairngorms, and that was it in terms of Scotland. Oh no, I did a trip up to Glen Shiel, but yeah, it was literally just really sporadic trips. And it wasn't until 2014 that things started to really turn around. I went back to the Alps for the first time in a few years, and I did a backpacking route from Aosta over to Evelina on the Swiss side, exploring some of the passes and things there. And I decided when I was on that trip, I'm going to break out of this cycle. I'm going to quit my job at Carphone Warehouse. I'm going to train to be an editor, and I'm going to try and do things properly. And I'm going to try and make a more adventurous life for myself and arrange things so I can spend more time in the mountains. And I've been basically trying to do that ever since, steer things back in that direction.
Yeah. And don't want to jump forward too far, but have you managed it yet?
Yeah, I'm definitely. I think so.
I would say so. From knowing you on social media and knowing you a little bit, I can definitely see that you've forged that path.
Yeah.
So. Something that I'm kind of aware of, you're very, what's the word I want to say, kind of literature based. You have a lot of reading. I know that, and that's obviously what adds to the skill of your job. How does that, you said it shaped some of the routes that you've done, how has that shaped what your thought process is on when you're approaching hills and trails,
That's a really interesting question. I think it feeds into the fact that a lot of the trips I do into the hills are, there'll be a commission for a magazine feature or something like that. So I am always thinking in terms of the narrative or the story behind whatever I'm doing, even if I'm not doing it as a commissioned piece. My background in reading about the mountains, I see narratives and everything. So whenever I do literally anything in the mountains, I'm always thinking in terms. I almost see myself as a character, which is a weird way to look at yourself, because sometimes a day in the hills is just a day in the hills. But ultimately, I'm always kind of subconsciously looking for those narratives and stories, and that just seems to be the way I think.
And is that for professional, or do you think that's just the way that you?
I think that's just the way I am, maybe. Yeah. Partly as well, I think it's the fact that I was obsessed by fantasy novels as a child. I mean, I know it's very common for long distance backpackers to be obsessed by The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, because basically they're backpacking books when you think about it. Hobbits go off on a massive quest, walk hundreds of miles. It's basically backpacking, and particularly Cape Wrath Trail, a route I've done twice. And again, we're skipping ahead a bit here, but you can't help but think in terms of these mythical quests, and that's partly what appeals to me about the whole thing. The mountains are it's this kind of I don't like to use the word playground, but it's almost like a setting where these mythical things can take place.
Well, definitely, I think that a lot of these programs use the outdoors to base themselves in. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of truth there. And in terms of planning for your trips, what were the highlights? Which trips would stand out at that point? Like, so you're just kind of decided that you're going to retrain as an editor, which I can't imagine is a quick thing. How do you get then to your outdoor articles and commissions? Yeah,
so for me, I was quite lucky in a few opportunities came my way at kind of convenient times. So I trained with it's now the Chartered Institute for Editors and Proofreaders. At the time, it was the Society for Editors and Proofreaders. So I joined up with them. I did their training courses. I became accredited, and I sought clients for editing their manuscripts. And at the time, it was mostly self-published authors, because that's pretty much what I was at that point. I'd self-published my novel, The Only Genuine Jones. It didn't sell very well, and I kind of don't like people to buy it anymore because I don't see it as representative of my current writing.
I have read it, it was good.
Oh,
I did enjoy it, yeah.
You're one of the few people who did.
No, genuinely, I did enjoy it.
Oh, thanks. But
I'll be honest, I was sat and when you mentioned his name, I thought, that's right, you wrote that book.
In another life, basically. But yeah, so the route from that to outdoor writing and editing, it was largely due to the long distance trails that I started to do. So that was in 2015. I'd read Rattlesnakes and Bald Eagles by Chris Townsend, which is his book about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in the early 1980s, and that really inspired me. I was like, right, I'm going to get back into multi-day backpacking, because I'd had quite a long... my Alpine trip in 2014 was really one of the first proper multi-day trips I'd done in a number of years. I thought, right, I'm going to get back into backpacking. I'm going to start doing bigger routes. And my 2015 Cape Wrath Trail was really the thing that kick-started everything. I went and did that trip, and Emily Rodway, editor at the time at TGO magazine, she sent me a message. She was like, I'd like you to write a feature on hiking the Cape Wrath Trail. I should mention as well, David Linton had previously hired me to write a piece about my Alpine trip the year before. So that was my very first proper published feature. Yeah. I'd had a couple of reviews done in UK hill walking, but David Linton's feature for Mountain Pro magazine, which sadly no longer exists, that was my first proper published feature. And then my relationship with TGO began when Emily Rodway said, write this Cape Wrath Trail piece. And I started to realise that I could go and have adventures and then I could write about them, because once I'd had this Cape Wrath Trail feature published, Emily said, if you want to pitch anything else to me, please do. So I was like, oh, I could do more of these. and it kind of went from there. And that was the year when Andrew Mazzabrada at Sidetracked said, Alex, do you want to come on board as our sub-editor. And he and I had worked together on fiction projects before, so my fiction background did definitely feed into it in a roundabout way. We'd worked together on a couple of sci-fi anthologies, and he said, I'd like a sub-editor I can work with. We'll have Alex.
Yeah, so that's obviously brought you into sort of very, TGO, Sidetracked. We've talked about Sidetracked today, and other publications, like you say. So another thing we talked about today was that hunting those became a bit of a chore. Right? Having to find something to make money, because that's, as a self-employed
that's the
adventure
thing.
writer. It has to put money in the bank and food on the table. Where were the challenges there?
Yeah, so there was a spell, kind of 2016 to 2018, where every trip I was doing at least one feature about it, and I was being published very, very frequently in TGO, which was fantastic. And it's been great to see the magazine go from strength to strength, particularly in the last couple of years. But at the same time, there very much was this pressure, because this was part of my strategy for living this more adventurous life. I realised that if I'm having to get commissioned features for literally every trip I do, there's this pressure to make every trip notable in some way. And yes, I'm always looking for these narratives and these storylines when I go on the hill, but if that kind of takes over from the enjoyment on the hill, the balance is upset slightly too much. So I was aware that I needed to change the balance of my career slightly in order to just make it so that sometimes I could just go on the hill to enjoy a day on the hill. But I didn't really manage to successfully do that until a lot more recently.
Yeah, you still have to make money regardless of what you actually want to do.
This is the thing, yeah.
And another thing I wanted to talk to you about was social media. Now, I've known you on Twitter for a long time, and so recently I suppose your Instagram has become a lot more active, and we'll touch on that in a second, I think. But there are periods of time where you used to kind of come off, and it was a case of I can't. So how has that affected you? And I suppose I'm touching on mental health and things like that here, so I'm kind of treading carefully.
No, definitely, it's an important subject, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, so I have always struggled with social media. So I was quite an early adopter of Facebook. Well, I was a very early adopter of Facebook, actually. So when it came to the UK, originally it was just for university students, and UEA Norwich, I believe, was one of the first universities to sign up to Facebook. So I signed up in, I think it was early 2006, and at that time it was fantastic. Literally just students. The great unwashed were not on Facebook. It was like a cool place for students to be. But even back at uni, I realised that I was developing a toxic relationship with social media. It wasn't just Facebook. It was forums as well. Like UK climbing forums. I used to be very, very active on there many years ago, and social media has always been one of those things where it's my kind of procrastination comfort food, if that makes sense. So when I should be focusing on something, the urge to just log on to whatever platform and waste time, and I was really bad at resisting that urge for years. But then in kind of 2018, my dad, he became ill a couple of years before then, but he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And so this kind of 2016, 2017, 2018 period, there was, I was becoming a lot busier at work. My dad was increasingly seriously ill. I was starting to feel the pressure from a few different sides. And my mental health was definitely suffering. I realised that I was probably suffering from some form of anxiety. And I thought that possibly the internet was partly to blame, or how I use the internet. And I definitely at that time had a really toxic relationship with social media. So I left Facebook for, I think, nearly 2 years completely. I just wasn't on it at all. I went through lengthy periods of just completely disconnecting from Twitter and Instagram because I felt like I couldn't deal with them. You go onto Twitter and there's all the notifications there waiting for you, and there's thousands of angry people with angry things in their own little, arguments that they're going on about, and I felt it was just it just kind of adds up in the back of your mind, and it was just something I felt that I absolutely couldn't deal with. And that all kind of came to a head. My dad sadly died in early 2018, and I thought I need to kind of learn what is actually causing this anxiety. So that's really behind the story of my Winter Cape Wrath Trail, which became my book, The Farthest Shore. I thought I'm just gonna completely unplug for a while. I'm gonna seek out the loneliest long distance trail I can possibly find in the UK, and I'm just going to go and be alone for a long period of time, no internet access whatsoever. So that I'm just going to do the Cape Wrath Trail in winter. I'll take my phone, but I won't connect to the internet, and I'll see what happens.
I think so. Prior to the Cape Wrath Trail, what was your outdoor? Were you getting lots of outdoor trips out?
Yeah.
Where I suppose I'm trying to get to is the outdoors not enough to reset you? That's what I use it for.
Yeah,
it kind of reset me.
I see what you mean.
So did it just have to be a disconnect?
Yeah. I mean, the problem was, I think, on a lot of my outdoor trips until then, I was still going online when I was on the trail. So, for example, 2018, I went to the Mercantile National Park and I hiked the Mercantile Traverse, which is a wonderful, wonderful route. But I was still using my phone. I was sticking up Instagram stories when I was on the trail, whenever there was signal. And I never really felt that I was in control of it. And I never really felt that I was getting enough of a break for what I needed. So I'd only get little kind of snippets of time away. And at that time, that wasn't enough, So I thought I just need a reset. So I had my reset. I had my few weeks on the Cape Wrath Trail in winter, and I came back feeling a lot more positive about it all, to be honest.
Yeah, and was that a turning point in terms of social media? Let's say, it
was a complete turning point. I mean, as I write about in the book, I came to realise that I really had been focusing far too much on the negative aspects on social media. I'd been learning about how the tech companies exploit people's attention spans, and I'd been focusing on the targeted ads and all the negative side, and I really hadn't been thinking about all the many positive sides. The fact that most of the most important connections in my life are people I've first met online. I first met my wife online. I first met many of my best friends online. And I hadn't really been focusing enough on these human connections, because ultimately on the Winter Cape Wrath Trail, it was the few human connections that I made on the trail that made the experience. So I'd gone out there looking for this ultimate solitude, but that wasn't really the meaning of the trip. The meaning of the trip was, sharing a couple of days with Chris Townsend in Torridon and having these really interesting conversations about the impact of outdoor writing on the natural landscape, or keeping bumping into a young lad called Skye hiking the Land's End to John O'Groats via the Cape Wrath Trail. These are what made the trip. So I came back thinking social media can be a force for good. You've just got to approach it in the right way. And
take the positives from it.
Take the positives from it. And I no longer really feel the need to take these complete breaks from it. I think I have taken a couple since then, but they're much shorter, and I'm far more able to use it intentionally now. And I mean, yes, I sometimes still waste time on Twitter, as everyone does. I'm not saying I've got this Zen level of control now, but I don't. It doesn't affect me like that anymore.
No, that's good. Obviously, I'm aware of you on Twitter and social media. I think on Twitter, you're probably, for me, on my algorithm, whatever feeds it, you're certainly you help a lot of people in terms of from advice on kit or routes or anything like that. You're always very forthcoming. So yeah, it's always good to see that positive aspect of it, and I'm glad that you're able to kind of frame it the right way. If there is a right way for social media, I do have a love-hate with it.
Yeah, I think we all do.
I think that's definitely right. Yeah. So in terms of trips in that time, what trip stands out? But let's set aside the Cape Wrath Trail because obviously that was quite formative. What about the Alpine Trips? You've done a few. So where do the highlights sit?
So several trips to Zermatt, most definitely climbing 4,000 meter peaks, have been absolutely wonderful. A roller as well in 2000, which year was that? 2010. That was really good. Went with a friend of mine and we climbed a couple of peaks around there. And again, it would have to be the Mercantile Traverse, one of the very best. It's not an area I'd really even heard about before. I think I read about it online about a week before going.
It's not it's not somewhere I'm aware of. So where is it based out of?
Maritime Alps. So it's near Nice. It's right down near the Mediterranean. The mountains don't get that high. They're up to around about 3,000 meters, but they're just absolutely amazing. And there's this trail. It's about I'm trying to think how long it is off the top of my head. I think it's about 160 kilometers, something like that. Just heads up onto this frontier ridge between France and Italy, and just coasts along this ridge for quite a few days. It's just got everything you could wish for.
How long?
Absolutely wonderful.
How in distance?
It's about 160 kilometres off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long did that take you?
That took me, I think it was 6 days. Again, this is just off the top of my head. I could be wrong.
And when you look at any of those kind of long distance trips, is there a minimum? Like, would you say, well, I'm not doing 2 days? Is that?
With trips to continental Europe, I've never done trips that short before. Yeah, so it would normally have to be a good kind of 5 or 6 days for it to be worthwhile for me, I think. Yeah, I think the shortest one I've done in recent years was the Karwendel Hohenweg near Innsbruck in Austria, and that was, I think, 3 or 4 days. That's a relatively short one. Terrible weather, but really lovely mountains.
At least there's some positive.
Yeah.
And where, I don't want to call them low points, but in terms of where you've had to learn something about either yourself or your kit, like what out there, because it's different out there. The Alps are different than the UK. So what did you learn out there?
Oh, right. So again, this would have to be Mercantile Traverse. There was a real learning point. Thunderstorms in high alpine areas, it can be a real hazard if you're up high and a thunderstorm comes in the afternoon. Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes you have to get down really quickly. And there was a particular thunderstorm hit me when I was, I think, 2 days up on the frontier ridge, and I decided to camp. And the only place I could find to pitch my shelter, which was this floorless tarp tent kind of thing, I had just like a plastic ground sheet. I didn't have like an inner tent or anything like that to save weight. The only place I could find to camp was this dished out area between boulders where you can tell that it was just this place that everyone had camped on. So the ground was packed really, really hard. It wasn't going to absorb any water. But of course I wasn't thinking about that. I was just like, I've got to get a shelter up. I've got to get under this shelter before the heavens open. I got my shelter up, the heavens opened, and the water just collected in this. It was a mixture of kind of torrential rain and hailstones, and the hailstones were bouncing under the tarp and just like coming into my shelter, and there was me cowering there with lightning flashing all around and just thinking, yeah, this is a bad life choices have led me here.
Well, I suppose you've got to take a thunderstorm every now and then, but what can you learn from that? Don't be up high in a thunderstorm.
Well, you could learn that, or you could learn to, I don't know, maybe you could learn to just stay in a hut every now and again, because I seem to have this aversion to huts. I think it stems from being a skint student when I was like, right, I'm not going to spend money on huts, I'm going to bivvy everywhere. And I think I've still got relics of this attitude because, I don't have to bivvy everywhere now, but part of me still feels that that's the way to do things.
It's ingrained in you.
Yeah.
You've got Scottish in you, is
yeah.
And in terms of UK trips, again, setting aside Cape Wrath, because I think we'll talk about that in a minute. What stand out?
So I've done a few really good ones in recent years. So I really enjoyed the West Highland Way a few years ago. It's one of these routes that kind of more hardcore people think, oh, it can't be that fun. It's an easy trail, but actually it's wonderful. I really, really enjoyed it. Also, the Skye Trail on the Isle of Skye is really, really nice. It's got a lot of variety. Goes around a bit the coastline, up in the hills. Very much enjoyed that. And also just various kind of routes I've pieced together myself by just looking at maps, particularly in the Cairngorms. I've spent a lot of time in the Cairngorms the last few years. So probably the best Cairngorms trip I've had recently was right before lockdown 1, so 2 years ago. I went up with Chris Townsend and headed up Binnock Moor. Beautiful conditions, really, really nice. Chris headed back, and I continued on to the Cairngorms. Just did a big circuit. I camped on, can't think of it off the top of my head, but one of the Munros above Loch Etchkin, and continued over Ben Macdui. It was just perfect. You know, it was the best way to kind of, because everyone knew that the world was about to change, and I think a lot of people have got these stories, haven't they, where everyone's got this last trip before lockdown, and they think it's not going to be the same after this, and this was mine, you know. So I was just really glad I just had this amazing kind of multi-dayer in the Cairngorms before it all went wrong.
Yeah, and I suppose that led us all to be stuck away from mountains. And as you mentioned earlier, Lincolnshire is not in any way a mountainous area of the UK. So how did you cope with that? Yeah,
it was very difficult. I'm not going to lie. So the part of Lincolnshire I live in is right near the coast. There really are no hills at all. It's on the edge of an old marsh, so the landscape is very agricultural. But if you kind of know a bit about the ecology and the natural history of the area, you can kind of sense the landscape that used to be there before it was all cultivated. And for me, this became part of how I coped with it. So I would take my 1 hour allowed exercise a day, and I would go out walking with my camera and a wildlife lens in the early mornings through an area of preserved meadow habitat, which used to be marsh centuries ago. So you've still got kind of like little fringes of marsh and kind of traditional hay meadows, and it's technically a wildlife trust nature reserve, but it's very out of the way, and they don't really advertise it. It's quite a special place. Surprisingly so for Lincolnshire, which is a very biodiversity depleted area in general. But this was literally the sole thing that got me through. It was taking my telephoto lens out into the old ings and the meadows early in the morning, and watching the barn owls and the roe deer, and particularly that spring was absolutely sublime for flowers. It was just absolutely amazing that the orchids coming up in the meadow, and the blossoms coming out in the hedgerows. That was literally everything. You know, that was the thing that got me through, was focusing on local wildlife and planning future trips as well. You know, thinking what I could do when the world comes to rights again.
Still waiting.
Yes.
No, we're nearly there. But I mean, what trip that you were planning then is going to be the. Or have you? Are they all done now?
Well, no.
Like what you got planned?
Well, at the time, I was really planning to go and do a route called the Nordkalotleden in Scandinavia. So this is also known as the Arctic Trail. But my interest really got sidetracked by a pun intended, yes, by a big route in the Alps. So I want to go back to the Alps, and I started looking at my maps, and I was working on a book for Gestalten at the time called Wanderlust Alps, about this collection of backpacking trails in the Alps, and one of the routes that appealed to me was the Grand Traversata del Alpi, which is a traverse of the Italian side of the main Alpine chain, and from the Mediterranean up to the Italian-Swiss border. And I looked at that and I thought I could base a really good route on that, adding a kind of a bit more on the end. So I got my maps out and I plotted this big 1,000-kilometre route through the Alps, and I thought, you know, I could make it a bit more interesting by turning it into a fast packing trip. So rather than just plodding along as I usually do, I'll get fitter and I'll run bits of it. I'll do it as a fast packing trip. So I'm going to go and do it this summer.
Amazing. We have talked about that earlier, and it does sound amazing. And I
Yeah.
think something else we talked about today was gear, and fast packing, and we'll maybe jumping back a bit, but um, how have you found? I mean, you're obviously quite an early adopter of being as lightweight as possible. Where have you seen the changes there? And obviously being a gear editor and things like that, or a gear reviewer at TGO, you'll have seen a lot of gear come through in the past
Oh,
the past few
definitely.
years.
Yeah.
What has been as a bit of a gear geek myself, what do you think's been the things that have changed the
Well, I mean, definitely. I mean, when I started getting back into backpacking and started writing outdoor features in about 2015, if you wanted really ultralight kit, at that time it was still mostly small cottage manufacturers that were making them. So, if you wanted an ultralight tarp or an incredibly lightweight backpack, you pretty much had to order it from America, from some, a company with like 5 guys working in a shed or something. And you can still do that now, but for me, it was in around about 2017, a lot of the main brands started to realise there was this market for people who wanted much lighter kit. And I mean, other brands had been doing it for a long time, but I think more brands started to offer more choice in things like lightweight packs and lightweight waterproofs. And it really seemed to increase from then. So, like, as of right now, if you want to go ultralight backpacking, in my opinion, there's no particular need to go and order something special and custom made and very expensive from America or whatever. You can go to a number of the main brands, like Montaigne do a huge amount, for example, of really good ultralight kit. A number of the others, Berghaus, do some great ultralight stuff as well, and you can kit yourself out with stuff from them. So I think that's a really positive development, because ultralight backpacking is not just about masochism and punishing yourself. Like, there are massive benefits, in my opinion. It's made a lot of my trips possible that I never would have felt capable of doing with my old approach with a massive great big pack and big clumping boots.
I think, I suppose the boots is an interesting conversation, or an interesting topic, in terms of that switch. And I think the book you mentioned earlier of Chris Townsend has sparked the change in you, especially for footwear.
That's right.
What have you found to be a benefit there?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was rattlesnakes and bald eagles, reading about how Chris, in the early 80s, he'd started the PCT wearing big hiking boots, as everyone did in the 80s, but he'd carried these lightweight shoes for just wear around camp, and he'd suffered badly from blisters in the desert and sore feet, and he switched to hiking in his lightweight shoes and kept wearing them. And to be honest, I think that was the first I'd really heard about people hiking in lightweight shoes. I'd never really heard about it before. And I thought, well, if I want to do long distance trips, I'm going to give this a go. So yeah, Cape Wrath Trail in 2015 was my first trip hiking in running shoes, and it's made all the difference.
What season your 2015 one?
That was a June one, but it was quite a cold June. It wasn't that summery.
Right.
But yeah, it's made all the difference. So I would almost always get blisters with big boots before. No matter what boots, no matter what size, I could never seem to completely escape from blisters. And that's partly because, as I mentioned earlier, my feet just seem to overheat all the time. In summer, even in winter sometimes, I'd get hot feet and that would just lead to blisters. And it's kind of game over when your feet get too hot. So,
and on the Cape Wrath Trail, obviously you've written a book about it. Mm-hmm. Get it, for Vertebrate, the Farthest Shore. What was in the winter? What was your footwear in there?
Yeah, so in the winter I didn't quite go with trail shoes. I'm not quite confident enough yet wearing running shoes in winter. I know there are people who do. Like, I was just seeing on Instagram, Nikki Spinks has been up on the Tranters round in running shoes and micro spikes. I'm not quite there yet. On winter ground, I still feel like, if I know that it's going to be steep snow or anything like that, I still feel like I need mountaineering boots, which I should probably work on because I know other people manage it just fine. But yeah, for that trip I wore, I can't remember the exact model, but they were Scarpa, relatively lightweight B1 boots. And yeah, I didn't have a fun time doing those big days with big boots, it must be said. My feet did not really respond that well to it. I didn't really get any bad blisters, but I got, a few small blisters and just general sore bits, and you really feel the extra weight on your on your feet when you're wearing these much heavier shoes. You know,
definitely, you definitely feel it literally. I suppose. I suppose the one of the obvious questions is, what is your favourite trail?
My favourite trail, Pyrenean Haute Route, absolutely, yeah. So that was the second long distance trail I did in 2019. And that had been one I'd been planning to do for years, and it was just absolutely sublime from start to finish. So that is the complete traverse of the Pyrenees from Atlantic to Mediterranean. It was about 830 kilometres the way that I did it, and it was very, very special.
How long did you spend on that?
I spent, let me think, I think it was about 20 odd days. Yeah, it was about 20 odd days.
And what made it so special?
Just everything about it. It's just the way that, again, I'm going back to the kind of the narrative sense, that the way the route develops, you've got a number of distinct sections that kind of build up towards each other. So you start with the kind of rolling countryside of the Basque, and then you've got this amazing section of limestone karst mountains, and then you've got the very dramatic glaciated Central Pyrenees, and then at the end you've got the much drier section towards the Mediterranean. So it's almost like chapters that you can move through, and also the trail,
the story, the narrative,
exactly. And the route does have this legendary status. It's regarded as one of the very best European kind of mountaineering long distance trails, and it really is. I had a very good time on that trip.
And where could people read about that?
I haven't written about that one as much as you might think, actually. I've written about it for Sidetracked. There's an online feature for Sidetracked, which is on their website, called, I think it's called The Meaning of Adventure, possibly. But there is definitely a TGO, a Sidetracked feature. And I also wrote about it for TGO as well. That's not on their website. I did republish it on my own website, but my own website had a bit of a crash recently, and a lot of stuff got erased, so I'm not sure if it's still on there.
It's been a while since you've trained as a computer programmer.
So...
It's no problem, we'll not hold that against you. And obviously at the moment, you are, as you mentioned right at the start, you are the editor for Sidetracked, which leads to I'm sure a few crazy ideas from its creative director. And how has it been for being the editor of Sidetracked?
Oh, it's been amazing. I mean, Sidetracked has always been my kind of favourite role. So I was sub-editor of Sidetracked for a number of years, and it was always the work that I loved the most. So even when I was writing features about my own adventures and editing books by other people, it was always editing these amazing stories of adventure from other people that I would look forward to every single week. So when Andrew stepped down and he said, "Alex, do you want to be editor?" I didn't even have to think about it. I just said, "Yes, please." And it's fantastic. It's I really think that it's the very best of adventure writing. That's what we try and put in it. And the approach that I take to editing is I always look at the draft that I'm sent, and I work with the writer, and I try to bring out the very best in that story as well. So quite often I will talk to them in detail about it, and I will try to kind of fill in the blanks, the things that they haven't really mentioned, and try to help the reader really inhabit the story. So I guess I bring my fiction background to that as well, because even though you're telling a true story, you want it to be told like an engaging story, not kind of like a dry journalistic piece. So that's the approach that I take to it.
Yeah, I think that it certainly shows as an overall. Sidetracked is a beautiful thing. I think that's probably the best way to describe, well, the best way I can describe it. And how do you see that developing? What is there for you? What is Sidetracked going to do for you, do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, Sidetracked has been wonderful for me in terms of my personal career, because it's meant that I can, as we're expanding at Sidetracked, I can work could work for Sidetracked more, and it's meant that I'm not editing book manuscripts anymore. So this was one of the things, again, we were talking about this earlier, much as I do enjoy editing book manuscripts, they also take up a huge amount of time, so you'll be working on this single project and you'll be kind of chained to your desk for weeks and weeks and weeks. And at the end of last year, I thought, you know what, I'm just doing too much. I kind of feel a little bit guilty saying that, because I know a lot of outdoor creatives have struggled throughout the pandemic, but I think I've been quite fortunate, and I've apart from a little bit right at the beginning, I've always had enough work, and at some points I've been guilty of taking on too much. And I thought, you know, I need to make more time for myself for shorter trips to the hills, not just these bigger trips that I can move everything around for. I need to be able to give myself more opportunities for shorter trips. So I decided, you know, when at Sidetracked we had our meeting and we talked about expanding, and John said, do some more hours for Sidetracked, and I said yes please, and I decided to stop editing book manuscripts and just focus on Sidetracked.
Well, as you mentioned earlier in this podcast, you said that you needed to spend more time in the outdoors, and if that 6-week block prevents you from getting in the outdoors, and that can, I imagine, could affect you.
Yeah.
And hopefully it helps your wife as well, for you not being so grumpy.
Yeah. I'm definitely too grumpy if I spend too much time at home and not enough time in the mountains.
Yeah, and I think all our outdoor people are a bit like that. So, and in terms of yourself, then you talked about the 1,000-kilometre trail that you're looking to do later on this year. Is that right?
Yeah.
And in the future beyond that, is there anything that you've on the wish list? I'm sure there's many, but
so to be honest, I'm not really thinking that too far ahead of this one for the time being, because I'm so focused on training for this and everything else. But I definitely want to go back to Scandinavia, so possibly not the Nordkalottledden. I might do it, but I'm thinking more in terms of kind of creating my own route, maybe going up a few more of the mountains in Norway and Sweden, maybe taking the fast packing approach there as well, because one of the challenges with backpacking in parts of Scandinavia is just carrying food supplies for long periods if you're walking. So there are some huts that have food supplies, but if you're in remoter areas, like for example, even on the Nordkalottledden, I think if you're walking, there's a 2-week section between resupplies. That's that's a lot of food to haul. So maybe going back to Scandinavia. I really would absolutely love to do some backpacking in North America. I don't have any concrete plans yet though, so.
I was about to ask if anything like the PCT or anything like that, if that was on the list going forward.
Yeah, well, the PCT is one of these trails that I've been kind of obsessed with it for years, ever since reading Chris's book. But my interest in it has faded a little bit, and I think that's purely because it's become quite popular in the last few years, and maybe this is the snob in me, I don't know, but I kind of feel like I wouldn't enjoy it as much if there were a lot of other people on it. I do enjoy the social aspect of being on trail, sometimes if there's other people, you know, with the same goal. I really enjoyed that on the Pyrenean Haute route, but there weren't that many other people on it, whereas from what I've read, the PCT is getting very busy now, so I'm not sure I'd enjoy that. But yeah, definitely long distance backpacking in North America. It's on my list of things to do.
Yeah. I think we've talked quite a lot, and I've kept you quite a long time. I suppose one thing that comes up when I talk to people is passion. I think it's evident that you have a passion for the outdoors. If you were to try and summarise that, how would you summarise your passion in the outdoors?
Whoa, if I was to summarise my passion for the outdoors, I would say it's what makes life worth living. Like genuinely, I literally live for this stuff. I think if it were to be taken away, I have no idea what I would do. I would have no idea who I would even be. Genuinely, it's been part of my identity for so long. So yeah, it's literally everything.
I think that probably sums it up quite well. Alex, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Also, thanks to Yeti for these mugs. I haven't actually been able to drink out of it because it's so bloody hot. But yeah, thanks to Yeti for sending us these for while we're chatting. But more than that, thank you for your time. It's been really interesting. I had a good hike with you today.
Yeah, it's
Pap
been
of
great.
Glencoe, and then sitting down doing this has been great.
Thanks very much.
No problem, thank you. That's been Passing Outdoors, and hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. I believe it helps with the algorithm. But we hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks very much.